Are you crazy? The voice exploded through the small buka, cutting through the usual lunchtime chatter. Mama Esther didn't even flinch. She stood behind her steaming pots, eyes calm, hands moving swiftly as she scooped a large spoonful of egusi soup onto a plate of pounded yam. The man in front of her, a dark-skinned, middle-aged businessman in a neatly ironed kaftan, was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling like someone had just slapped him. "I said, are you crazy?" he repeated, his voice shaking. His hands trembled as he clutched his head like he was trying to stop himself from losing control. The other customers stopped eating. The air in the buka became thick with tension. A few men whispered to each other, eyes darting toward Mama Esther. "Calm down, Chief," Mama Esther said, her voice smooth, almost mocking. She placed the plate in front of another customer without looking up. "It's only the food. Why are you behaving like someone who has lost his mind?" Chief Kalu shook his head violently. He looked around the buka, his eyes wild, his lips trembling. "Why can't I stop coming here?" His voice cracked as he spoke. "I told myself that I would stop, that I would eat my wife's food. I swear to God I promised myself. But I'm here again. Every day, I'm here again." His voice rose, bouncing off the walls. Mama Esther finally stopped serving. She looked at him, her small eyes sharp and calculating. "It's because you love my food," she said softly. "Or is there any other crime I committed?" Chief Kalu's fingers dug into his scalp. "This is not normal," he whispered, his body shaking so hard that his agbada nearly slipped off his shoulders. "It's like voodoo. I cannot explain it. What did you put in this food?" A nervous laugh rippled through the small buka. Some men shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs, but no one spoke up. Mama Esther stepped out from behind her pots. She wiped her hands on her wrapper and walked toward Chief Kalu slowly, each step controlled and deliberate. The other customers cleared the way, their eyes down, their plates suddenly more interesting. When she reached him, she smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "You understand I can kick you out of my buka?" she said quietly. "If you don't like my food, go find another place." Chief Kalu froze. His lips moved, but no words came out. He wanted to walk away. Everyone could see it in his face. But his feet didn't move. His eyes flickered to the steaming pot of egusi behind her. His fingers twitched like a man fighting himself. And then, just like that, his shoulders dropped. The tension in his face melted into something else. Shame, defeat, surrender. He turned to the small table in the corner and sat down without another word. Mama Esther nodded approvingly and returned to her station. Moments later, a plate of food was set in front of Chief Kalu, and he ate it, every last bite. "That man is not well," someone muttered. Obi watched everything from his seat near the window. He had heard the rumors, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. He reached for his phone under the table and tapped the record button. His camera pointed straight at Chief Kalu, whose hands were shaking as he scooped up the last lump of pounded yam. A man beside him, a short trader with tribal marks, leaned in. "You see it?" he whispered. Obi turned to him. "Saw what?" The trader's eyes darted around before he spoke. "That man has sworn like this before," he said. "Last month, he said he wouldn't eat here anymore. He said he would focus on his wife's food." Obi frowned. "And?" The trader sighed and shook his head. 2 days later, he's back again, sitting on the same chair, eating like someone under a spell. He leaned closer. "My brother, this food is not normal." Obi said nothing, but inside his heart raced. Obi had been investigating Mama Esther for weeks. First, it was just curiosity. A few people at Cityscope magazine had joked about her food being spiritually programmed, because of how men acted like addicts after eating there. Then came the real stories. A bank manager emptied his account to buy Mama Esther a brand new car. A pastor who once preached against street food was seen licking his fingers in her buka at midnight. A rich alhaji with 3 wives stopped going home, claiming he had important business in Suralere. He was found sleeping in his car outside Mama Esther's shop. And now there was Chief Kalu, Obi didn't believe in voodoo, but this was too much. His gut told him this wasn't just good cooking. There was something else, something dark. That night, Obi sat in his tiny apartment, rewatching the video on his phone. He could see it clearly: Chief Kalu's struggle, his breakdown, and his surrender. Obi rubbed his forehead. What was Mama Esther putting in that food? He knew one thing for sure: he had to find out. But he had to be careful. Mama Esther wasn't just any buka owner. She was feared, respected, connected. People who spoke against her either disappeared or lost everything. Obi exhaled. He couldn't afford to make mistakes. If he was going to expose Mama Esther, he needed proof, solid, undeniable proof. And there was only one way to get it. He had to go inside. Not as a journalist, not as an outsider, but as one of them. He had to eat from Mama Esther's pot, even if it meant risking everything. "You will never leave me." The words echoed in Chief Kalu's head as he stood outside his car, sweat dripping down his face. His hands trembled as he tried to push his key into the lock, but he couldn't, because deep inside he knew the truth. Mama Esther owned him. He had sworn to God, that he would never return. But here he was, belly full, fingers sticky, grateful and afraid at the same time. What did she put in that food? The question burned in his mind like hot coal. His phone rang. It was his wife. He ignored it. He couldn't face her, because how would he explain why he was here? How would he tell her that, despite everything, he would come back tomorrow? That he had no choice? Across the street, Obi sat in his car watching Chief Kalu. The man looked like someone battling his own shadow. 1 minute, he wiped his forehead, pacing in circles. The next, he stood still, staring at the buka like it held his soul inside. Obi sighed. This was bigger than he thought. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his notes. His mind kept circling back to one thing. If he wanted answers, he needed to dig deeper. But digging deeper meant stepping into the lion's den. And in Lagos, lions don't like being disturbed. Later that evening, Obi drove into a dimly lit compound in Mushin. The smell of burning herbs and dry leaves filled the air. He knocked 3 times. A deep voice answered from inside. "Enter." The room was dark, lit only by flickering candles and the dull glow of a kerosene lantern. Baba Fatai sat on the floor, grinding something in a wooden mortar. "Ah, journalist," the old man said without looking up. "You have come again." Obi took a deep breath. "Baba, I need to know something." The herbalist scoffed, still pounding the mixture. "You young people never learn everything you want to know. But when trouble comes knocking, it's old men like you people run to meet." Obi ignored the jab. "It's about Mama Esther." Baba Fatai's hands froze. He turned slowly, his cloudy eyes piercing through the shadows. "You've put your hands where it doesn't belong," he said, his voice suddenly grave. "What were you looking for there?" Obi hesitated, then pulled out his phone and played the video. The old man watched Chief Kalu's breakdown, his eyes unreadable, his face like stone. When the video ended, Baba Fatai exhaled loudly and closed his eyes, like a man remembering something painful. "She still uses it." Obi leaned forward. "Use what?" Baba Fatai's voice dropped to a whisper. "Food binding." Obi frowned. "Food binding?" The old man nodded, then grabbed a small wooden carving of a woman from his shelf. He turned it in his hands, his fingers tracing ancient symbols carved into the wood. "Some women," Baba Fatai began, "don't use charm on their body. No beads, no powder, no soap. It is food that they use to tie a man." He looked up at Obi. "Once they cook for you and you eat, your spirit will belong to them. You will do anything they want. Your life would basically be inside their hands." Obi swallowed. "But how? What do they put in the food?" The old man's face darkened. He turned and grabbed a small calabash bowl. Inside was something strange and murky. He tilted the bowl toward Obi. "You see this?" Obi peered inside. A dark liquid shimmered under the candlelight, thick and almost alive. "It is a woman's sweat and water from her cloth." Obi's stomach turned. "Wait, Baba, you mean Panties?" Baba Fatai's voice was barely a whisper now. Some women wear it, dance with it, sleep with it, and when it is full of their essence, he lifted the bowl. They will squeeze it inside the pot of soup. Obi's body went cold. Mama Esther's special ingredient. It was her own panties. Obi shook his head. Baba, isn't that voodoo? Baba Fatai chuckled darkly. My child, not everything is voodoo. Some things are just ancient knowledge. Women have been doing it long before you were born. But how does it work? Obi pressed. The old man set the calabash down and sighed. You see, spirits are in the body. A woman's essence is stronger than what you can understand. The same way women carry babies for 9 months is the same way she can carry your destiny inside the food. Obi wiped his face. This was madness. That must be why they can't stop coming to her buka? He muttered. Baba Fatai nodded. It binds them to her. Once they get a taste, their mind would follow her. If they try to stop, they would feel like something is missing. Some even go crazy. Obi exhaled sharply. Chief Kalu, the bank manager, the Alhaji sleeping in his car. All of them were tied to Mama Esther. This wasn't just business. It was slavery. Obi rubbed his palms together. Baba, how does a person break it? Baba Fatai looked at him carefully. Have you eaten the food? Obi shook his head. Not yet, but soon. The old man's eyes narrowed. You want to enter into the lion's mouth? I don't have a choice, Obi said. I need proof. The old man sighed deeply. He reached into a wooden box and pulled out a small, black pendant tied to a red string. Wear it, he said. Obi frowned. What is this? Protection. Baba Fatai handed it to him. It wouldn't prevent it. But if you eat the food, it will buy you time before it consumes you completely. Obi tied the pendant around his neck. Felt heavy, almost too heavy for something so small. Remember, Baba Fatai said, no matter how sweet the food is, don't ever forget that it is poison. Obi nodded. His mission was clear now. To expose Mama Esther, he had to eat from her pot and pray to God that he wouldn't become her next victim. Oga, why are you back? Obi looked up from his phone. The voice belonged to a young girl, maybe 16 or 17, standing behind the buka's wooden counter. Her eyes darted around like she was afraid someone would hear her talking to him. Obi swallowed, forcing a smile. I'm hungry. The girl wiped her hands on her apron, lowering her voice. You said you are a journalist, right? I won't lie, I saw you the other day when you recorded Chief Kalu. If they catch you, you would be in trouble. Obi kept his expression calm, but inside, his heart was pounding. Who will catch me? He asked. The girl's lips parted like she wanted to say something, but then she shut them quickly and glanced toward the back of the buka. Obi followed her gaze. Mama Esther was standing there, half hidden behind the beaded curtain that led to the kitchen. She was watching him. Her small eyes held no expression, but something about the way she tilted her head made Obi feel like she already knew everything about him. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she disappeared behind the curtain. The girl turned back to him, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up a bottle of Fanta from the counter. Oga, she whispered urgently, I beg you in the name of God, leave this place before it is too late. Obi's stomach twisted. He should have listened, but instead he did the exact opposite. He smiled and said, Give me food. The moment the plate hit the table, Obi felt like he had just walked into a trap. The steam from the pounded yam rose in soft swirls, carrying the unmistakable smell of Mama Esther's famous egusi soup. The yellow color was perfect, the oil glistening, the rich aroma wrapping around him like invisible hands. A plate of food. A simple plate of food. And yet this was the test. This was what had turned men into slaves. This was what had dragged Chief Kalu back, time and time again, like a man chained to something he couldn't see. Obi exhaled slowly and picked up a lump of the pounded yam. Across the room, Mama Esther had returned. She stood near the kitchen door, her arms folded, watching. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched. Obi's fingers tightened around the soft yam. His mouth was dry. His pulse was loud in his. Just eat a little, his mind whispered. Just taste it. Pretend as if it works. Then you find out the rest later. His hands trembled slightly as he dipped the yam into the thick egusi soup. The rich, nutty scent filled his nose. He brought it to his lips. And then he took a bite. It was instant. The sweetness, the spice, the depth of flavor. It wasn't just good. It was something else. Obi's body relaxed without him meaning to. The food melted in his mouth, coating his tongue, filling every corner of his mind with warmth. It was like being wrapped in a blanket after standing in the cold for hours, like drinking cold water after running under the sun. He blinked. He had taken one bite, just one, but already his fingers itched to take another. No. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay in control. His stomach was screaming for more, but his mind had to stay sharp. He looked up. Mama Esther was still watching. She knew. Her lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile. Good boy, she murmured. Obi swallowed hard. This wasn't just food. It was a chain, and now it was inside him. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. Obi forced himself to eat slowly, to act normal. But every bite was like sinking deeper. His fingers tingled. His tongue felt too heavy. His heart was beating too fast. By the time he finished, he could barely remember when he had taken the last swallow. He leaned back, blinking, feeling like his body wasn't his own. Mama Esther walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. You will come back tomorrow. It wasn't a question. Obi's throat went dry. His body, the same body that was fighting just moments ago, nodded before he could stop it. Mama Esther smiled again and walked away. But as she disappeared behind the kitchen curtain, she whispered something under her breath. Something Obi almost didn't hear. You belong to me now. Obi staggered out of the buka, his hands feeling weak. The air outside felt too hot, too cold, too different. His head was buzzing. Something wasn't right. He touched the small protective pendant Baba Fatai had given him. Had it worked? Had it stopped the full effect? Or was he already falling under the spell? His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a message. But the screen was blank. The phone had switched off. Battery dead? No. He was sure it was charged. Then why? A slow, creeping thought entered his mind. She knows I'm watching her. Something told him that eating from Mama Esther's pot was only the first trap. The real danger? It was just beginning. Obi, how do you feel? The question came from somewhere far away, but it yanked Obi back to reality like a slap to the face. His head felt heavy, like it had been stuffed with cotton. His body was too light, like he was floating but sinking at the same time. He blinked. Baba Fatai was watching him carefully, his old eyes sharp. Obi, the old man repeated. How is your body now? Obi opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't even know how to describe what he was feeling. His stomach felt full, but not from food. His head wasn't thinking straight, but he knew his mind was still his. And then, the worst part, his fingers were itching. Not like a normal itch. An itch to eat again. Obi's chest tightened. It hadn't even been 24 hours since he ate at Mama Esther's buka. And already, his body was calling him back. This was bad. Very, very bad. Baba, I won't lie, Obi finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. I feel somehow, like my body wants to pull me back. Baba Fatai sighed deeply, shaking his head. It has begun. Obi swallowed. You mean to say, the food has trapped me? The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned and picked up a small black powder from the shelf. He poured a bit into his palm, then gestured for Obi to open his mouth. Swallow. Obi hesitated but obeyed. The powder tasted like bitter leaves mixed with charcoal. But within seconds, his body shook as if something inside him was resisting it. Baba Fatai muttered. What? Obi's hands curled into fists. Talk to me, Baba. The old man sighed again. You haven't fully entered, but if you do not take time, it will hold you strongly. It's like a chain, Obi. The more you eat, the more you lose yourself. Obi exhaled. This was worse than he thought. The real test came the next morning. Obi had planned to sleep in, but his body woke him up before dawn. At first, he didn't realize what was wrong. Then it hit him. He was hungry, but not just any hunger. Not hunger for bread, rice, or anything he could cook in his kitchen. No, he was hungry for Mama Esther's food. Obi sat up sharply, gripping his bedsheet. This wasn't normal hunger. It was a craving, a need, a deep, urgent pull. He ran to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. No, I won't go back. I won't go back. He muttered the words like a prayer, gripping the sink. But his stomach growled loudly, almost like it was laughing at him. This was what happened to all the other men. This was how it started. They told themselves they would stop. They told themselves they were in control. But the next thing they knew, they were sitting at Mama Esther's buka, swallowing pounded yam like slaves. Obi clenched his jaw. Not me. He grabbed his phone and checked the time. 7:15 a.m. If he was going to survive this, he needed a plan. Obi arrived at Mama Esther's buka just before noon. The place was full as expected. Men sat in clusters, laughing, eating, licking their fingers. Some looked like they had been there for hours. But Obi didn't sit down. Not yet. He wanted to watch. He wanted to see what he had missed the first time. He leaned against a nearby kiosk and observed. Mama Esther stood behind her pots, serving food with a smile. She moved with confidence, like a queen feeding her subjects. Every time a man received his plate, he looked at her the way a lost dog looks at its owner. Thank you, Mama. God go bless you, Mama. This food is heaven. And the strangest part? Some of these men were already full, but they kept eating. Obi's stomach twisted. Was this hunger? Or was it something else? And then he saw it. A young man, no older than 25, sitting at the edge of the buka. His plate was empty, but his hands were shaking. Obi frowned. The man wiped sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting toward the pots. He looked sick, desperate. Then, suddenly, he stood up too fast, knocking over his chair. Everyone turned. Mama Esther watched him. Mama, please, the young man said, his voice trembling. Give me more food. She didn't answer immediately. She let him sweat, let him beg, let him shake. Then she smiled. Do you have money? The young man froze. He patted his pockets frantically, but he already knew the truth. Mama, please, I will bring money later. Just small food. My body is shaking. Mama Esther folded her arms. No money, no food. The man looked like he was going to cry. Obi watched, his heart pounding. This was beyond food addiction. This was control. Mama Esther owned these men, and she knew it. Obi knew it was his turn to move. If he didn't sit down and eat, Mama Esther would suspect something. So he forced his legs to move. He walked into the buka and sat down. Mama Esther's eyes flickered toward him immediately. She smiled. You have come back. Obi forced himself to smile. Yes, Mama. She gestured at one of her workers. Give him food. Moments later, the same steaming plate of egusi soup was placed in front of him. His fingers twitched. His stomach growled. He could feel the pull again. He looked up. Mama Esther was still watching. This was the real test. Could he eat without losing himself? Could he pretend without becoming one of them? Or was this the moment he truly lost control? Obi's hands hovered over the steaming plate of egusi soup. His fingers twitched. His stomach tightened. The smell alone was dragging him in, like invisible hands pulling him toward the plate. He could hear the bubbling oil, see the rich yellow color, feel the hunger curling in his belly. Even though he had eaten before coming here, his throat was dry. Across the buka, Mama Esther was watching. Her small, sharp eyes studied him. Her lips curved in a knowing smile. Eat, my son, she said softly. Obi swallowed hard. This was it. This was the moment. If he ate, he had to do it carefully, just enough to keep up the act, but not enough to lose himself. If he refused, she would know. And if she knew, it was over for him.